I've hinted at this repeatedly, but I'm going to be explicit because it's somehow poorly understood that the Soviet Union collapsed not due to communism or centralized planning, but due to the introduction of market reforms. Now, we can have debates about whether things were really worse there or not. I, to me, the debate is not whether things were bad there. Things were bad there, but things were bad here too, right? Or things were bad in the States. The question is, were things really worse in the Soviet Union than they were in the States? Keeping in mind that things were bad in both places. But the breaking point is not up for debate. The lines around the street for bread were because of pro-market reforms, not in spite of them. So this is what I'm worried about with Trump, that he'll let that kind of thing happen in the United States. It's the same basic problem that Ron Paul always presented. If you pull back funding enough, the state will collapse altogether. It's a realistic threat, not necessarily from Trump himself, but from the Congress, and from Trump just acting as a tool of a movement that wants to just dismantle everything, right? So I keep pushing this idea that Trump will produce glasnost. I'm not going to stop either, okay? Um, and I'm not the first person that's going to present this kind of idea, that, the American empire outlasted the Soviets, but not by very long, right? So this idea of, one side winning the Cold War is kind of not understanding the situation properly. A proper historical comparison, I think, is to the wars that existed between Rome and Persia. Persia was at war with the West for the better part of 1,000 years, right? But the Roman Empire and the which one was it? I guess it would have been the Sassanids, primarily. Parthians and the Sassanids near the end. Um, but the geopolitical entity in the space of where Iran is today, and the historical Persian Empire, um, which was a little bit. Historically Iraq has been a part of Persia, and the area of the Middle East, Syria, the Levant, parts of Turkey, Armenia. Armenia is like um, Armenia was one of the most important provinces of Persia, right? So the history of Armenia is very firmly within Iranian history, right? Um, in fact, for a long time, people thought that Armenian, the language, was a dialect of Persian, and it's still kind of not. There's a whole centum satum thing. We don't need to talk about Indo-European language is here, but there's some thinking. There was thinking for a long time of that, right? I think that the more standard theory nowadays is that um, they just picked up the numbers for money, right? So it's a satum. Did I get that right? Yeah. It uses the Eastern word for hundred because they used Persian coinage for so long, right? But nonetheless, that whole swath of space, right up Egypt, it was in the crosshairs between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire for a really long time. And if you, I think most people know that the Islamic Empire or the Caliphate or whatever you want to call it, and there are different words to call it, but the empire begun by Muhammad, um, sometime around the year 600 AD, or 600, CE, ish, could not have expanded if it wasn't for these wars between Rome and Persia, right? And in the end, technically, the Romans beat the Persians, technically, right? And the Roman Empire was declared the King of Kings, and it was like the technical defeat, but it lasted something like 20 years, and then the Muslims came out of or the Arabs came out of the desert, took over Persia, and it was it was what's the word? Well, there's a very specific word that I'm looking for. It was a very Pyrrhic victory, and that a lot of commentators have suggested that, if you want to call it a victory, but whatever happened in the Cold War at the end of the Cold War was massively Pyrrhic for the United States, and that at the end of the day, the United States will probably not outlast the Soviet Union for much longer, right? We're coming up on 20 years. Is it? No, we're coming up on 30 years. Um, yeah, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it might be the end of the run for the American empire. And Trump could be it. Um, if that's the case, like I say, I'm not the first person to point it out, and I'm going to use this language very consciously because I think it's very useful.